They were singing when the light came. High Marshal Vural Catherine stood on the observation deck of the flagship undimmed Concordance and listened to 40,000 voices braided into a single hymn. And for the first time in a career that had spanned 3 wars and 11 annexations, he allowed himself to believe that the singing was earned. Below the deck's great crystal blister, the assembled fleets of the coalition hung in the dark like a field of lamps. 2,000 warships, the combined might of 9 species, gathered at the edge of a small yellow star's gravity well, arranged in the ceremonial spiral that the coalition reserved for one occasion only, the confirmed extinction of an enemy. Vural had seen the spiral flown twice before in his life. Once for the silt weavers, whose oceans had been boiled. Once for the harrowkin, whose homeworld had been cracked to slag over the course of a single long afternoon. Both times he had been a junior officer, watching from a gunnery pit, too far down the chain of command to understand what he was seeing. Now he stood at the top of the chain and he understood it perfectly. The spiral meant that a species was finished. It meant that the long arithmetic of a war had finally resolved to zero and that the survivors, the victors, could permit themselves the one indulgence their creed allowed. They could sing. High Marshal, his flag adjutant, a slender Thren named Aska, approached across the deck with her wing membranes folded tight in the posture of formal deference. The Speaker of the Conquered requests your presence at the confirmation. The count is complete. Vural did not turn from the blister. Complete, he repeated. He tasted the word. In his own language, the Cathari tongue, the word for complete and the word for closed were the same, and he had spent 40 years learning the difference. The last of them, then. The last, High Marshal. The final human resistance cell was located and neutralized 8 days ago in the outer debris field of their home system. Long-range sensors confirm no organized human vessels remain within 1,000 light-years. The species is assessed as functionally extinct. The Conquered wishes to fly the spiral before the fleets disperse. Humans. Vural let the word settle. It had been such an ugly little word at the start. Such a small, unpromising species. He remembered the briefings from 11 years ago, when the first survey drones had returned images of a wet blue world crawling with a soft, thin-skinned bipedal thing that had barely learned to leave its own atmosphere. The Coalition's Assessment Bureau had rated the Human Threat Index at 4, on a scale that ran to 1,000. A 4, prey species were rated higher. The Bureau had been wrong. They had been so wrong that the word wrong felt like a mercy. 11 years. 11 years and the loss of 90 warships and the deaths. Vural had memorized the number. He made himself carry it. The deaths of 411,000 coalition crew. To exterminate a species that had never had more than a few hundred ships to its name. A species that built its warships out of the wrong materials, that flew them too hard, that sent them into fights no rational commander would accept. And that died, and died, and kept coming, until the coalition had been forced to abandon every projection its bureau had ever made and simply grind the humans down world by world, ship by ship, body by body, the way one wears down a mountain, not by strategy but by the sheer stubborn expenditure of everything. And now it was done. Tell the Speaker I will attend, Vural said, and Aska. High Marshal. He turned at last from the blister, and the young Thren saw his face and folded her wings tighter. Vural Catherine was old, by the standards of his kind. His hide had gone the deep slate gray of a Cathari past his fighting years, and one of his eyes had been replaced with a milky ocular prosthetic after Thren's space, and he carried himself with the heavy stillness of a creature who had watched too much die. But it was not age that made Aska fold her wings. It was that the High Marshal did not look like a victor. You were on the human front, Vural said. It was not a question, he knew her record. 3rd Fleet, the Meridian Campaign. I was, High Marshal. Then you were at the Ashfall. Aska's wing membranes went utterly still, which was the Thren equivalent of a flinch. I was, High Marshal. The ashfall. Vural had not been there, but every officer in the fleet knew the story. A single human warship, a battered thing, half its guns gone, venting atmosphere from 100 wounds, had been trapped against the accretion disk of a dead star by an entire coalition battle group. 40 ships against one. The human vessel had been given the ritual offer of surrender, as the creed required, and the human vessel had answered by ramming the flagship of the battle group at a velocity that turned both ships into a single expanding shell of plasma. 9,000 coalition crew had died in the ashfall, and the humans aboard the rammer, there had been perhaps 200 of them, had done it knowing there was no reinforcement coming, no strategic gain, no one even left alive to sing their names. They had done it because they would not be sung to a spiral. They would not be a confirmed extinction that went quietly. "I attend the confirmation," Vural said slowly, "because it is my duty, and because 2,000 ships and 40,000 crew deserve to hear their High Marshal say that the thing is finished and their friends did not die for nothing." He moved past her toward the great doors of the observation deck and paused, and for a moment the milky eye seemed to look through the hull, through the singing fleets, out into the dark where a species had ended. "But I will tell you what I have not told the conquered, Adjutant. I do not think this species knows how to be extinct, and I do not intend to sing until I am certain it has learned." He walked out. Behind him the hymn swelled, 40,000 voices climbing toward the note that meant closed, meant complete, meant safe at last. And Asuka stood alone at the crystal blister and looked out at the field of lamps, and found that she could not make herself join in. The confirmation chamber of the undimmed concordance was the largest single interior space in the coalition fleet, a vaulted amphitheater carved into the flagship's dorsal spine, and it had been built for exactly this. The speaker of the conquered stood at its center on a disk of white stone, and around and above her rose the tiers, and in the tiers stood the representatives of 9 species, and every one of them wore the pale ceremonial ash that the creed prescribed for a spiral. Vural took his place in the High Marshal's box and looked down at the speaker and thought, not for the first time, that she looked like something that had never been afraid in its life. The speaker was Iridine, one of the old founding species, tall and luminous and translucent, their bodies filled with a soft internal light that pulsed in time with their speech. When she raised her arms, the light in her ran gold. When she spoke, the chamber's acoustics carried her voice to every tier without amplification, a trick of the architecture that had been designed to make the conquered seem to speak from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the air, from inside the listener's own skull. 9 peoples, the speaker said, and her light pulsed with each word. 9 peoples gathered at the grave of a 10th. We do not gather in joy. Our creed forbids joy in the ending of a thinking kind. We gather in the older thing, the necessary thing. We gather in relief. A sound moved through the tiers, not a cheer. The coalition did not cheer. It was a low harmonic exhalation, 9 species breathing out together, and it raised the hair along Vural's spine because he had heard that sound only twice before, and both times it had meant the same thing. It meant the fear is over. It meant we may sleep again. 11 years ago, the speaker went on, a survey of the Orion margin found a young species on a wet world. We assessed them, as we assess all young species, against the covenant that has kept 9 peoples alive across 4,000 years of the dark. And they failed the covenant. They would not be assessed. They would not be guided. They would not accept their place in the order of the living. They chose instead to fight. The light in her ran deeper, toward amber, toward the color the iridine bodies made when they grieved. We did not want this. Let the record of the conquered show, across all the years the stars remain, that we did not want this. We offered them the covenant 9 times. 9 times by the creed before a single shot was fired, and 9 times they answered our offer of a place at the table with fire. And so we did the terrible arithmetic, as our forebears did with the silt weavers and the harrowkin, and we paid the price the arithmetic demanded, and we have. The speaker's light flickered, and for just an instant, for the length of a single word, something moved behind the luminous mask of her face that Vural, watching very carefully, recognized. "We have finished it." Finished, closed, complete. Not once, Vural noticed, had the speaker said the word extinct. "Fly the spiral," the speaker said. "Sing the closing, and let the young species that comes after this one, whoever they are, wherever they are, learn from the grave we stand upon tonight. The covenant is not cruelty. The covenant is the only kindness the dark allows. Accept your place and live. Refuse it." She spread her arms, and the light in her blazed white, and 40,000 voices took up the closing hymn, and 2,000 warships began, slowly, to fly the spiral around the small yellow star. "And this is the mercy we are forced to give." The hymn rose. It rose, and Vural stood in his box and did not sing, and out beyond the crystal and the steel, out in the long cold dark between the flagship and the dying star, the fabric of space, very quietly, in a place no sensor was pointed, in a way no instrument in the coalition was calibrated to detect, began to fold. Nobody saw the first sign because nobody was looking for it. There was no reason to look. The war was over. The enemy was extinct. Every sensor in 2,000 ships was tuned outward, toward the theoretical dark from which a theoretical new threat might someday come, and not one of them was tuned toward the empty, well-charted, thoroughly conquered volume of space at the center of the ceremonial spiral, where nothing had existed for 8 days but the graves of the last human ships and the slowly cooling debris of a war already won. It was in that empty volume that the light came. It did not arrive the way a ship arrives. Ships arrive from somewhere. They cross a distance. They trail and exhaust. They announce themselves in the language of momentum and heat that the coalition sensors had been reading for 4,000 years. This did not cross a distance. It did not come from somewhere. One instant the volume of space at the heart of the spiral was empty, charted, dead. The next instant there was a wound in it, a seam of hard white light, thin as a knife edge, that opened where no seam should be, and behind the seam was a place that was not the dark, a place that hurt to look at, a place the color of a scream. And through the seam came a ship. The alarms began before anyone understood what they were seeing. In the confirmation chamber the hymn faltered. It did not stop. 40,000 voices do not stop all at once, but it broke, a fracture running through the harmony as, one tear at a time, the singers noticed the censor officers scrambling, the light panels flushing red, the founding representatives half rising from their seats. The speaker's own luminous body had gone a hard, startled white. Vural Catherine was already moving. He came out of the High Marshal's box before the general alarm finished its first cycle, and by the time he reached the command spine of the undimmed concordance he had shed 40 years the way a swimmer sheds water, and the old creature who had stood grieving at the crystal blister was gone, and in its place stood the thing that had fought 3 wars and won them all. "Report," he said, and the command deck snapped taut around him. "High Marshal, contact." The censor chief was a young Cathari, and his voice cracked on the word. "Contact at the center of the spiral. 0 range from the ceremonial null point. High Marshal, it wasn't there. I have the logs, it wasn't there. And then it was there, there's no approach vector, it didn't come from anywhere." "Classify it." "Trying, sir. The censor chief's hands moved across his board. "It's a warship. Confirmed warship, single hull, mass approximately." He stopped, started again. "Mass approximately equivalent to a coalition heavy line vessel. Configuration is, sir, the configuration is human." The word dropped into the command deck like a stone into still water, and the silence that spread out from it was total. "That's impossible," someone said, a gunnery officer further down the spine. "The humans are extinct. We confirmed it, we flew the—" Silence. Vural did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He crossed to the sensor station and put his good eye to the display, and there it was, rendered in the cold false color of the fleet's sensors. A single ship, hanging motionless at the exact center of 2,000 celebrating coalition warships. And it was human, unmistakably human, built with that ugly, brutal, functional refusal to waste a single line on beauty that Vural had come to know across 11 years of war. But it was wrong. Even for a human ship, it was wrong. "Why is it glowing?" Vural said. Because it was. On the display, the human warship was wreathed in a faint corona of that same impossible light that had bled through the seam, a light that had no thermal signature, no radiation profile, nothing the sensors could resolve into a known phenomenon. It clung to the hull like frost. And there was something else, something that made the sensor chief's hands go still on his board, something that Vural saw a half-second before the officer found the words for it. "High Marshal," the sensor chief whispered. "The hull, look at the damage on the hull." Vural looked. The human warship was scarred. Its flank was torn open along nearly a third of its length, a wound that exposed the ship's structural bones, and the metal at the edges of that wound was blackened and peeled and half-melted by weapons fire. It was a mortal wound. It was the wound of a ship that had been killed. And Vural had seen that exact pattern of damage before, the specific signature of a coalition annihilation lance, the weapon the fleet used to end capital ships, the same weapon that had ended the last human warships 8 days ago in the outer debris field of their home system. He knew this ship. He did not know how he knew it, but he knew it, the way one knows a face in a crowd before the mind has caught up. He had seen the reports. He had reviewed the after-action logs of the final engagement, the one that had confirmed the extinction, and there had been a ship in those logs, a human-heavy line vessel that had been lanced through the flank and left drifting dead in the debris, its reactor cold, its crew presumed lost, a corpse among corpses in the graveyard of a species. The fleet had not even bothered to recover it. There was nothing to recover. It was dead. It had been dead for 8 days. And now it hung at the center of his celebration, wearing its death wound like a badge, and it was glowing, and it was, very slowly, beginning to turn. "It's aligning," the gunnery officer said, and his voice had gone thin. "High Marshal, it's aligning its main axis. It's bringing its guns to bear." "On what?" Vural said. "On," the gunnery officer swallowed. "On all of us, sir. It's at the center of the spiral. Every ship in the fleet is inside its firing arc." For a long moment, High Marshal Vural Catherine stood at the sensor station and looked at the dead ship that would not stay dead, and he felt something he had not felt in 40 years. It moved up through his old body from somewhere deep, from the place where the Creed lived, from the place that remembered the ashfall and the ramming and the 200 humans who had died rather than be sung to a spiral. It was not quite fear. Fear was too simple a word for it. It was the specific dread of a creature who has just realized that the thing it declared finished was only ever pretending, and that it has been standing, singing, with its back to an open door. "Open a channel," Vural said quietly. "All frequencies. Coalition standard, human standard, everything we have." "High Marshal, the Creed requires that we offer the covenant before." "I know what the Creed requires." Vural straightened. "Open the channel and bring the fleet to battle stations, all of it. Now." The alarms changed pitch. Across 2,000 warships, the ceremonial spiral shattered as ship after ship broke formation and clawed for battle alignment, the great slow celebration dissolving into a scramble, and 40,000 voices that had been singing the closing hymn fell silent and reached for their weapons. The graves of the humans, it turned out, had not been graves at all. They had been a door left ajar, and something had come back through it. The channel opened, and in the silence of the command deck, from the dead ship at the center of the spiral, a human voice began to speak. Her name was Captain Isolde Reyes, and she was 28 years old, and by every reckoning of physics and biology and 8 days of coalition certainty, she was supposed to be dead. She stood on the command deck of the warship Perihelion Vow with both hands braced on the rail of her command dais, and she watched the tactical display resolve out of chaos into a picture so absurd that a younger version of herself might have laughed. 2,000 coalition warships, arranged in a spiral, around her. She had come out of the fold expecting many things. She had expected to die, mostly. That was the honest truth of it. She had expected the fold to finish what the coalition had started. But she had not expected this. She had not expected to arrive at the center of the enemy's victory party. "Status," she said, and her voice did not shake, which she counted as a small private triumph. "We're here." Her navigator, a wiry man named Chen who had been awake for what his body insisted was 19 hours and what the ship's chronometer insisted was something else entirely, stared at his board with the expression of a man reading his own autopsy. "Captain, we're here. The fold held. We're in one piece. But I don't, Captain, the star's wrong. The positions are wrong. I've got the whole enemy fleet on sensors and they're flying a formation I've never seen and the debris field is gone. The whole graveyard is just gone and I can't." He looked up. "I can't tell you where we are, or when we are. The fold moved us and I can't read the ledger. When we are." Isolde had known this was possible. Everyone aboard had known it, in the abstract, in the terrible theoretical way. You know a thing when you're strapping yourself into a machine that has never worked and pulling the trigger anyway, because the only alternative is dying with your hands at your sides. The fold drive was not supposed to move you through time. But the fold drive was not supposed to work at all, and they had built it out of a salvaged coalition core, and a wounded human hull and 8 days of desperation. And when they triggered it, the universe had done something to them that no human being had ever survived to describe. And now the graveyard was gone, and the star was in the wrong place, and her navigator could not read the ledger of when. "Later," Isolde said, "we figure out when later. Right now, I need to know how long we have before 2,000 ships finish turning around." "Not long." Her weapons officer was a hard-faced woman named Okonkwo who had lost her whole family in the first year of the war and had not smiled since. "They're scrambling, Captain. That was a formation for a party, not a fight, but they're professionals. 2 minutes, maybe 3, before they've got firing solutions on us from every angle. And Captain," Okonkwo's hands tightened on her board, "there's a lot of them. There's more of them than I've ever seen in one place. If they all fire at once, the Vow doesn't have shields for that. Nothing has shields for that." Isolde looked at the display. 2,000 ships. Her own ship, one ship, wounded, its flank torn open from the fight 8 days ago that they had barely survived, its reactor running hot on a jury-rigged regulator, its shields at 60% and falling. One ship against a fleet, and the fleet was already turning. She should have been afraid. Some part of her noted, distantly, that she was not. She had used up all her fear 8 days ago in the debris field, when the Annihilation Lance had punched through the Vow's flank and killed 40 of her crew and left the ship a drifting corpse, and she had crawled through the wreckage with the survivors and made a choice, to fix the ship or to fold it. They had done both. And somewhere in the doing of it, in the 8 days of welding and calculating and burying the dead, Isolde Reyes had come out the other side of fear into a cold, clear, bottomless place, where the only thing left was the work. "Chen," she said, "are we the only ones?" Chen looked up from his board. He knew what she meant. It was the question that had been sitting in the center of every human chest since the graveyard vanished from the sensors, since it became clear that the fold had thrown them somewhere the war was over, somewhere the coalition was singing. "I don't know," he said. "I've got no human signatures anywhere, but Captain, if the fold moved us in time, if it moved us forward, then the answer to are we the only ones might be," he couldn't finish it. "Might be yes. Might be that they had folded out of a war they were losing and into a future where the war was already lost, where the last human ships were graves in a debris field the coalition had already swept clean, where a single wounded warship and its exhausted crew were quite literally, all that remained of the human species. Isolde looked at the tactical display, at the 2,000 ships at the spiral, and understood with a terrible falling clarity exactly what she was looking at. They were flying a formation she had read about, in the intelligence briefings, in the after-action horror stories that came back from the front. The coalition flew it exactly twice in recorded history, both times over the graves of species they had erased from the galaxy. They were flying the spiral, the extinction spiral. They thought they had won. They thought humanity was dead. And Captain Isolde Reyes, 28 years old, standing on the deck of the only human warship left in the universe, felt the cold, clear, bottomless place inside her open all the way up, and knew exactly what she was going to do. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies. I want every ship in that fleet to hear me." Captain Okonkwo started. "Open it." The channel opened, and Isolde Reyes looked into the eye of a fleet that had come here to sing at her funeral, and she spoke. "This is the human warship Perihelion Vow," she said, and across 2,000 ships in 9 languages, the translation matrices caught her words and carried them. "You've flown the spiral. I know what it means. You flew it because you think we're finished." She let that hang. "You flew it too soon." On the command deck of the undimmed Concordance, High Marshal Vural Catherine stood very still and listened to the voice of a species he had helped to bury, and he found that he was not surprised. That was the terrible thing. Some deep old part of him had been waiting 11 years to hear exactly this, and now that it had come, it felt less like a shock than like the second half of a sentence he had started long ago. "I'm going to tell you something," the human voice went on, "and I want you to understand that I'm not telling you to frighten you. I'm telling you because your creed says you offer the covenant before you fire, and I think I owe you the same courtesy. So here is my covenant. Here is the only offer I have." A pause. Vural could hear under the words the sound of a ship at battle stations, the distant hiss of pressure systems, the murmur of a crew, the low continuous thrum of a reactor pushed past its limits. She was speaking to 2,000 warships from the deck of a single wounded ship, and there was no fear in her voice at all, and that more than anything was what turned the dread in Vural's chest to certainty. "You cannot finish us," Isolde Reyes said. "You've been trying for 11 years and you can't do it, and I'll tell you why, because I don't think you've ever understood it, and I think that not understanding it is going to be the thing that ends you. You think we're a species. We're not. Not the way you mean it. You can kill a species, you've done it twice, I've read your histories. You boil the oceans, you crack the world, you sweep the debris and the thing is gone. But we're not a thing that lives on a world. We're a thing that lives in each other. Every one of us that dies hands what they know, what they are, what they'll never surrender to the ones still breathing. You've killed billions of us. And every single time all you did was concentrate us. You've been distilling us for 11 years. And now." Her voice dropped, and somehow the drop carried further than a shout. "Now you've got all of it, everything we are, everything you couldn't break, packed into one ship, pointed at the center of your fleet from a place your sensors can't read, at a time you didn't expect. You flew the spiral for a corpse, and the corpse woke up inside your circle. So here's my covenant, coalition, here's my one offer. You have 30 seconds to break formation and run. Every ship that runs I let go, every ship that stays." The channel hissed. "Learns what we've become." The channel closed. For the length of one breath, the command deck of the undimmed Concordance was silent. Then the sensor chief said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "High Marshal, she's spinning up her weapons." Vural Catherine looked at the display. One ship, wounded, glowing, alone at the heart of a fleet 2,000 strong. Every tactical instinct he had, every principle of 4,000 years of coalition doctrine told him the same thing. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. A single heavy line vessel, however it had arrived, could not threaten 2,000 warships. The math did not permit it. She was buying time or dying loud or both. The correct response, the doctrinally perfect response, was to hold formation, envelop the intruder, and reduce it to plasma with overwhelming coordinated fire. He had given exactly that order 100 times. He did not give it now. Because Vural Catherine had spent 11 years learning, at a cost of 411,000 lives, that the correct response to a human warship and the survivable response to a human warship were almost never the same thing. He had learned it at the Ashfall. He had learned it at Meridian, where a human corvette had accepted certain death to leave a torpedo drifting cold and dark in a shipping lane, a torpedo that had killed a coalition dreadnought 3 weeks later. He had learned it in 100 engagements where humans did the mathematically insane thing, the thing no rational species would do, because they had understood something about the dark that the coalition, in 4,000 years of careful survival, had never once been forced to understand. That a creature with nothing left to lose is not weaker than a creature with everything. It is the most dangerous thing in the universe. Adjutant Vural said. Asuka had followed him to the command deck. She stood at his shoulder now, her wing membranes pulled tight. High Marshal, you were at the Ashfall, tell me. When the human ship rammed the flagship, did it announce itself first? Asuka was quiet for a moment. No, High Marshal, it said nothing, it simply came. It said nothing, Vural nodded slowly. It said nothing because it had already decided to die, and a creature that has decided to die does not waste breath on covenants. But this one, he gestured at the display, at the glowing ship, at the voice that had offered him 30 seconds. This one is talking. This one is offering. This one wants us to run. Then it's a bluff, High Marshal. It can't truly threaten the fleet, and so it. No, Vural's good eye did not leave the display. No, Adjutant, understand me. The ones who mean to die say nothing. This one is offering us a way to live, which means this one does not need us to die, which means... And here the old High Marshal felt the last of the day's certainty drain out of him, and the dread rise up cold and total to take its place, which means it can do exactly what it says it can do, and it would simply rather not, and it is giving us the chance to be spared. That is not a bluff, Asuka. That is mercy. And I have learned to be more afraid of human mercy than of human wrath. He turned to the command deck at large, and raised his voice for the first time. All ships, this is the High Marshal. Break formation, full dispersal. Do not engage, repeat, do not engage the intruder. All ships scatter to safe distance and stand by on my authority by my... He never finished the order, because the 30 seconds ran out, and Captain Isolde Reyes had counted 11 ships breaking formation to run, and 1,989 ships holding their ground to fight, and she had made her choice, and the perihelion vow fired. Chen had not believed the fold drive would work, and it had worked. He had not believed they would survive it, and they had. So when Captain Reyes gave the order to fire, some part of him was already braced for the third impossibility, the one they had built into the ship in the 8 desperate days in the debris field, the one none of them had ever tested because there had never been anything to test it on. They called it the Lanceback. It had started as a wound. The annihilation lance that had killed 40 of the Vow's crew and torn open her flank had also, in the instant of impact, dumped an enormous quantity of exotic energy into the ship's shattered hull, energy that should have finished the vessel, and instead, by an accident of geometry and desperation, had been caught, trapped. A young engineer named Adiz Okonkwo, sister of the weapons officer, had been dying of her wounds in the ruined engineering bay when she'd understood what had happened. That the Coalition's own killing weapon had, in the moment it struck, poured its energy into a resonant cavity the damaged hull had accidentally become, and that the energy was still there, coiled in the wreckage, waiting. She had spent the last 4 hours of her life explaining to her sister how to build a machine that could hold it, shape it, and give it back. They had built that machine. They had wrapped it around the salvaged coalition core and the wounded hull and the fold drive, and they had lanced the vow full of the same energy the coalition used to end species. And now, at Isolde Reyes' word, the perihelion vow gave it back. The ship did not fire a beam. It was not a beam. It was a discharge, a full and total release of everything the hull had been holding, and it went out from the vow not in one direction, but in a plane, a flat expanding disk of released annihilation energy that swept outward through the ceremonial spiral along the exact geometry the coalition had chosen for its celebration, the perfect flat spiral that had put every ship in the fleet on the same plane, in the same arc, in the same place. They had arranged themselves, Isolde realized, watching it go out. They had arranged themselves into the ideal target. They had come to sing over her grave, and in doing so they had lined up 2,000 ships on a single flat disk, and she had folded into the center of it carrying the coalition's own weapon turned inside out. And now the mercy she had offered them was the only thing that could have saved a single one of them, and 1,989 of them had refused it. The disk of light swept outward, and the extinction spiral, the formation the coalition flew only over the graves of the dead, became a grave in truth, but not the one they had gathered to honor. It did not kill them all. Isolde had known it wouldn't. A discharge that vast could not be perfectly shaped, and the outer edge of the spiral was too far, the energy too thin by the time it reached the periphery, and there were ships at angles the plane never caught, ships that had been rising or diving out of the ceremonial formation, ships whose captains had begun to run in the last few seconds before the vow fired. But at the heart of the spiral, in the dense central arc where the greatest and proudest ships had gathered closest to the speaker and the confirmation chamber, the disk of light passed through the fleet like a scythe through a field. 800 warships died in the first 2 seconds. They did not explode so much as unmake. Where the plane of light touched a hull, the hull simply stopped being a hull. The same trick the coalition's own annihilation lance performed on a single target, now performed on 800 targets at once, the exotic energy severing the bonds that held matter in the shape of a ship and letting the ship fall apart into its constituent nothing. There was no fire at first. Fire came later, when the reactors that had been at the hearts of those ships found themselves suddenly unhoused and let go of everything at once. But in the first 2 seconds there was only the light and the silence of the vacuum, and 800 warships becoming 800 expanding clouds. On the command deck of the undimmed Concordance, High Marshal Catherine watched his fleet die. The Concordance was flagship. The Concordance was at the center. The Concordance should have been the first thing the disk unmade. And it would have been, except that Vural in the last seconds, acting on an instinct older than doctrine, had already given the order to break formation, and the flagship's colossal engines had already begun to haul her monstrous mass up and out of the ceremonial plane. And so, when the disk of light swept through the arc where the Concordance had hung, the flagship was 3 ship lengths above it. 3 ship lengths. The margin between a High Marshal who lived and a High Marshal who joined 800 of his own. The light passed beneath the Concordance's keel like a floor of white fire, and Vural Catherine stood on his command deck and looked down through the crystal blister at the death of the largest fleet the coalition had ever assembled, and he did not sing, and he did not scream, and he did not give a single order for 11 full seconds, because there was, in that moment, no order in the universe that would have changed anything. Then the shockwave hit, the delayed detonation of 800 reactors, and the undimmed Concordance rang like a struck bell, and the moment ended, and the High Marshal came back to himself in a command deck full of dying alarms and screaming officers, and understood that the war he had spent 11 years winning had, in a span of 9 seconds, been utterly and completely lost. Damage, he said. His voice came out as ash. Catastrophic across the fleet. The censor chief was weeping, openly, the way young Cathari did when the thing was too large for the body. High Marshal, I'm counting. He could not count. His hands shook. Hundreds, High Marshal, hundreds of ships gone. The central formation it's gone, it's just gone, the speaker's ship, the founding delegates, he looked up, and his young face was the face of a creature watching the end of the world. High Marshal, what do we do? Vural looked at the human ship. The perihelion vow hung at the center of the ruin it had made, and it was not glowing anymore. Whatever it had held, it had spent. On the display it looked smaller now, diminished, a single wounded vessel adrift in an expanding graveyard of its own creation, and Vural understood with the cold clarity that had come to him that this, too, was the truth of humans. They poured everything into a single blow, they gave it all, they held nothing back, and when the blow was struck they were empty. The vow had emptied itself. For a span of seconds now, perhaps a minute, the deadliest ship in the galaxy was also the most helpless, a spent weapon that could not have fired again to save its own life. The doctrinally correct order was obvious. It was the same order the Creed had demanded from the beginning. Concentrate the survivors, envelop the human ship, end it now while it was spent, before it could recover, before it could do again what it had just done. Vural Catherine opened his mouth to give that order, and did not. Across the graveyard, on the command deck of the perihelion vow, Captain Isolde Reyes stood in a silence as total as the one aboard the enemy flagship. She had done it. The thing they had built the vow to do, the thing Adiz Okonkwo had died designing, the thing none of them had believed would work, she had done it, and 800 coalition warships were gone, and the fleet that had come to sing over humanity's grave was shattered and burning around her ship. It was the greatest single blow any human had ever struck against the coalition. It was, in the coldest possible accounting, a victory. She felt no victory. She felt the cold, clear, bottomless place, and she felt the ship shuddering around her as the shockwaves rolled through, and she felt mostly a great and terrible tiredness, because she understood exactly what she had just spent. Weapons, she said, the Landsback recharge status. Okonkwo did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat. There is no recharge, Captain. You know there's no recharge. It was one shot. Everything the Lance dumped into us, we gave back. There's nothing left in the cavity. If we want to do that again, she stopped. We'd have to get shot by another Lance, and survive it, and build another regulator, and we don't have a D's anymore. One shot. They had always known it was one shot. The Lanceback was not a weapon in any sense the coalition would recognize. It was a wound worn as armor, a death caught and thrown back, and you could only throw a death back once. The perihelion vow had just fired the only shot it would ever fire, and now it was exactly what the coalition sensors read it as. A single wounded heavy line vessel, shields at 40% and falling, reactor running hot on a jury-rigged regulator, surrounded by the survivors of a fleet that outnumbered it 1,000 to 1, and that had every reason in the universe to want it dead. Chen, Isolde said, the fold drive, can we jump? Chen's hands were already flying across his board, and the answer was already written in the set of his shoulders before he spoke it. No, Captain, the fold drive is cold. Folding once nearly killed us. The core needs 11 hours to cycle before it can fold again, minimum, and that's if nothing's broken. And Captain, a lot of things are broken. We're not going anywhere, not for 11 hours, not fast. 11 hours. Isolde looked at the tactical display, at the hundreds of surviving coalition ships now scrambling out of the shockwave, reforming, and she understood that she did not have 11 hours. She did not have 11 minutes. The moment the enemy commander understood that the vow was spent, and a commander who had survived what she'd just done would understand it fast, the surviving fleet would close in and finish what its dead ships had started, and there would be no second miracle, because they had already spent the only miracle they had. She had won the battle. She had won it in 9 seconds with a single impossible blow. And in winning it, she had used up every trick, every reserve, every desperate improvisation the 8 days in the debris field had given her. And now she stood spent and cornered at the center of the enemy's grief, with the last of the human species crewing a ship that could no longer run and could no longer fight. "Captain," it was Okonkwo, and her flat voice had gone strange. "The enemy flagship, it's not closing." Isolde looked. It was true. The great enemy vessel, the largest ship on the display, the one that had hauled itself out of the plane in the last seconds and survived, hung at the edge of the graveyard, wreathed in the drives of 100 smaller ships that were gathering to it, and it was not moving to attack. It was holding. The whole surviving fleet following its lead was holding, forming up, yes, closing to englobement range, yes, but not firing, not charging, waiting. "Why aren't they finishing us?" Chen breathed. "They have to know we're spent. Why are they just waiting?" Isolde Reyes looked at the enemy flagship, at the fleet gathering around it, at the terrible patient stillness of a force that outnumbered her 1,000 to 1, and had chosen, in the moment of its wrath, to wait. And a channel opened. Not on all frequencies this time. A single tight beam, human standard, aimed at the vow alone, a private line from the enemy flagship to her command dais. And a voice came through it, an old voice, weary and deep and speaking careful, accented human, the voice of a creature that had learned her language across 11 years of trying to kill her kind. "Human warship," the voice said. "This is High Marshal Catherine, commanding what remains of the coalition fleet. I know what you have just done, and I believe I know something you may not yet have understood about your own situation. I am going to tell it to you because I think you have earned the truth, and because I no longer believe the truth is on the side I have spent my life serving. Will you listen?" Isolde looked at Chen. Chen looked at Okonkwo. Nobody spoke. "I'll listen," Isolde said. Isolde had told the High Marshal she would listen, and she meant it, but for the space of one held breath, while the enemy fleet gathered and waited, and the old alien composed whatever he was going to say, she let herself remember how they had gotten here. Because a captain who had just killed 800 ships owed it to the dead to remember why. The Meridian Reach, 4 years ago, though it lived in her like yesterday. The perihelion vow had gone into the Reach as part of a battle line of 19 human ships, the largest concentration of force the dwindling fleet could still assemble, and it had come out the only one still capable of independent movement, and even that was a lie, because the vow had not come out at all. It had been lanced through the flank in the first 6 minutes, the annihilation lance punching clean through the hull, killing 40 of her crew where they stood, opening the ship to vacuum along a third of its length, and it had drifted dead in the debris field while the rest of the battle line was methodically taken apart around it. The coalition had swept the field afterward, confirming kills, and they had scanned the vow, and they had logged it as destroyed, a cold dead hulk among 100 cold dead hulks, and they had moved on. That mistake, that single unchecked box on a coalition after-action report, was the only reason any human being was alive to fly into the yellow star 4 years later. Because the vow had not been dead. It had been dying, which is a different thing, and human beings had spent 11 years teaching the galaxy exactly how much difference there is between the two. 20 of them had survived the lance out of 60. 20 human beings in a wrecked ship venting atmosphere, in a debris field the enemy had already declared clean, with a dead reactor and a hull torn open to the dark and no reinforcement coming because there was no one left to send. Any rational assessment, the kind the Coalition's Bureau made, the kind that had once rated the Human Threat Index at 4, would have called them dead. They were dead. The arithmetic said so. They had refused the arithmetic. It was, Isolde had come to think, the only thing her species had ever really been good at. Adiz Okonkwo had been the one who found the second life in the dead ship. She had been a junior engineer, 23 years old, and she had been dying of a wound that had opened her from hip to shoulder when the lance struck, and she should have spent her last hours in whatever comfort the ship's ruined medical bay could offer. Instead, she had made them carry her to engineering, and she had looked at the readings coming off the shattered hull, and she had understood something that no one else aboard had the eyes to see. That the lance which killed the ship had also, in the instant of impact, poured an ocean of exotic energy into it, and that the energy had not dissipated. It had been caught. The specific geometry of the wound, the way the hull had peeled and folded around the impact, had turned the dying ship into a resonant cavity, a bottle, and the bottle was full of the Coalition's own killing fire, and the fire was still there, coiled and waiting, hours after it should have bled away into the dark. "We can give it back," Adiz had said. Isolde remembered the exact sound of her voice, thin and wet with the wound but absolutely steady. "Captain, listen to me, I don't have long and this matters. They killed us with their own weapon and the weapon's still inside us. If we build a regulator, if we can shape the discharge instead of just letting it bleed out, we can give it all back at once. Everything they put into us. We can throw their own death back at them." She had smiled then through the blood. "They spent 11 years teaching us we've got nothing to lose. Let's show them what that's worth." She had spent the last 4 hours of her life explaining how. Her sister had held her hand and written it all down and asked the questions that kept Adiz talking, kept her heart beating past when it should have stopped, because the work was the thing that carried her, the way it always carried them. And when Adiz Okonkwo finally died, she died mid-sentence, describing the final tolerance on a resonance coupler, and her sister finished the sentence for her in her own head and built the coupler exactly right, and never once let herself grieve until the ship was flying, because there was work to do, and there is always work to do. They had buried her and the 39 others in the debris field, committed them to the dark alongside the 18 ships of the shattered battle line. And then the survivors, 20, then 19 when a man named Prakesh died of his burns on the 3rd day, had spent 8 days doing the impossible 3 times over. They had built Adiz's regulator out of rocket parts and refusal. They had salvaged a coalition core from a wrecked enemy vessel drifting nearby and coaxed it to life in a human hull. And they had built the fold drive because they knew the coalition would eventually return to fully clear the field, and a wounded ship that could not run needed somewhere to run to. That was not a direction. It needed to run through, not across. It needed to fold. They had never tested any of it. There had been nothing to test it on, and no time to test it, and no second chances to spend on testing. On the 8th day, the coalition's sweep ships had appeared on the edge of the debris field, exactly as feared, and there had been no more time, and Isolde Reyes had strapped 19 people into a ship built out of 3 impossibilities and a dead engineer's last words, and she had given the order to fold, and the universe had done something to them that turned 19 into 9 and threw the survivors 4 years into a future where the war was already lost. 9. They had gone into the fold as 19 and come out as 9, and no one had ever been able to explain what the fold took, or where it took them, only that the drive extracted a price in living crew each time it tore the fabric of the dark, and that the price was not negotiable. 9 human beings had come out the other side. 9 and a wounded ship, and a bottle still full of the coalition's own fire, and the memory of a woman who had died explaining how to throw it back. And they had come out at the center of a spiral, at the confirmation of their own extinction, with the enemy arranged, all unknowing, into the one shape that would let a single ship kill 800. Adiz had said, "Let's show them what that's worth." She had not lived to see it, but her sister had, and her captain had, and 800 coalition warships had learned, in 9 seconds, exactly what it was worth to teach a human being that she had nothing left to lose. Isolde let the breath out, the memory folded away. The old High Marshal's voice was in her ear, weary and accented and offering her the truth, and she came back to the ruined present, the graveyard she had made, the waiting fleet, the 4 years and the dead species and the 9 survivors of the survivors, and she understood that she was not going to let it end here. Not after the debris field. Not after Adiz. Not after everything the Dark had already taken and everything the 9 of them had already refused to give up. Whatever the old alien wanted, whatever came next, she was going to find the third road, because finding the third road when there wasn't one was the only inheritance her species had left her, and she was not going to be the captain who spent it. "I'll listen," she had said, and she listened. But underneath the listening, the cold, clear, bottomless part of her was already at work, already searching the ruin for the seam of light nobody else could see, because that was the thing Adiz had died doing, and it was the thing her whole species had done for 11 years, and it was the only thing in the end that the coalition had never once found a way to kill. "My people flew the extinction spiral tonight," the High Marshal said. "Do you know what that formation is?" "I know what it's for," Isolde said. "I've read your histories. You fly it over the graves of the species you've erased. You flew it over the silt weavers and the harrowkin, and tonight you flew it over us." "Yes," a pause, heavy with the weight of a very old creature choosing his words. "We flew it over you. And I will tell you the truth of why I am not, at this moment, giving the order to end your ship, though I have the ships to do it and every principle of my creed screams at me to give the order. It is because I am the third High Marshal in 4,000 years to fly the extinction spiral, and I am the first to see it fired back at me from inside the circle. And in the moment your weapon passed beneath my keel, I understood something, Captain, that I think you and I are perhaps the only 2 beings alive who understand. Shall I tell you what it is?" Isolde said nothing. She let the silence be her answer. "We never conquered you," Viral said. "We told ourselves a story. For 11 years we told ourselves that we were grinding you down, world by world, ship by ship, that we were paying a terrible price but that the arithmetic was resolving in our favor, that each of your worlds we burned brought the sum closer to 0. We believed the story so completely that 8 days ago, when we destroyed the last of your organized ships, we flew the spiral. We sang the closing hymn. 2,000 ships and 40,000 crew, and we let ourselves believe, for the length of one song, that we were safe." The old voice hardened. "And then a ship we had confirmed dead 8 days prior appeared at the center of our celebration, from a place our sensors could not read, at a time we did not expect, carrying our own killing weapon turned inside out, and it destroyed 800 of my warships in 9 seconds. Captain, I have reviewed the logs of your ship's arrival. It did not travel here. It did not cross a distance. It simply appeared, wearing a death wound 8 days old. Do you understand what I am telling you? I do not think your fold, whatever machine did this, moved you through space. I think it moved you through time. I think you left a battle you were losing and arrived in a future where you had already lost, and I think you did not know it until you saw my fleet flying the spiral." Isolde's mouth had gone dry. On the command deck around her, nobody moved, because the High Marshal had just spoken aloud the thing that Chen had not been able to finish saying, the thing that had been sitting in the center of every human chest since the graveyard vanished from the sensors. "How long?" Isolde said. Her voice came out steady, which she would never afterward understand. "You said the last human ships died 8 days ago. How long ago was that from where you're standing? What's the date, High Marshal?" The pause that came back was the longest one yet. "Captain," Viral said quietly, "I do not think that is the question you want the answer to, but I will give it to you because you have earned every truth I have. The engagement in which we destroyed the last of your organized fleet occurred 8 standard days ago, but the engagement you left, the battle in which your ship was lanced through the flank." The old voice was very gentle now, the gentleness of a creature delivering a wound. "Captain, I have your ship's damage signature. I have cross-referenced it against my after-action archives. The lance that struck your vessel was fired at the Battle of the Meridian Reach, and the Battle of the Meridian Reach was fought." He stopped. Isolde could hear him deciding whether to be merciful. She could hear him deciding not to be, because she had asked, and mercy would have been a lie. 4 years ago, Vural said. You have been gone 4 years, Captain. You left a war humanity was losing, and you arrived at the grave of a war humanity has lost. Everyone you knew who was not aboard your ship when it folded is 4 years dead. Your species is gone, and you and your crew are the last human beings alive in the galaxy. The command deck of the perihelion Vow was very quiet. 4 years. Isolde stood on her dais and let the number move through her, and behind her she heard someone make a small broken sound. Chen, she thought, or maybe it was her own throat, she couldn't tell anymore. 4 years. When the Vow had folded out of the meridian reach, humanity had been losing, but humanity had been alive. There had been fleets, there had been worlds, there had been the war, terrible and grinding but not yet lost. She had left a species. She had arrived at a graveyard. And in between, in the 4 years the fold drive had stolen from them. Everyone she had ever known who was not standing on this deck had lived out the last chapter of the war and lost it and died. And she had not been there, and she would never be there because you cannot fold backward. The drive only went one way, into the dark, into the future, into the after. Captain Okonkwo's voice was rough. She was thinking of her sister, Isolde knew. Adiz had died in the debris field 8 of the ship's days ago, 4 years and 8 days ago now, by the only clock that mattered. Everyone Okonkwo had loved was gone twice over. Captain, what do we do? Isolde did not answer right away. She was looking at the tactical display, at the hundreds of surviving coalition ships gathered around the great flagship, holding their fire, waiting. At the graveyard of 800 ships she had made in 9 seconds, at the small yellow star at the center of it all, around which the spiral had been flown. And she was thinking, with the cold, clear, bottomless part of her mind that had never stopped working, that the High Marshal had told her all of this for a reason. A creature that outnumbered her 1,000 to 1, that could have ended her ship in the moment it was spent, had instead opened a private channel and spent his words telling her the most devastating truth she would ever hear. Why? High Marshal, she said, you didn't open this channel to tell me my species is dead. I already half knew it. You opened it because you want something, so tell me, what do you want? The old voice, when it came back, held something she had not heard in it before. It was not quite respect. It was closer to recognition. The recognition of one exhausted commander for another, across the wreckage of a war that had cost them both everything. I want to tell you what happens next, Vural said, not what I want. What will happen, whether either of us wants it or not, because it is already in motion and neither of us can stop it. You destroyed 800 warships tonight, Captain, at the confirmation of an extinction in front of the founding delegates of 9 species, or in front of where they used to be. Most of them were on the ships you unmade. Do you understand what that means? The speaker of the conquered is dead. The founding delegates are dead. The coalition that has ruled this galaxy for 4,000 years lost its heart tonight, in 9 seconds, to a species it had declared extinct. And when word of this reaches the rest of the coalition, and it will reach them, Captain, there are ships already fleeing this system to carry the news. It will not be received as a defeat. It will be received as a resurrection. It will be received as proof that humanity cannot be killed. And every species the coalition has ever conquered, every world it has ever brought under the covenant by force, every people that has ever knelt because the alternative was to be sung to a spiral, all of them are going to hear that a single human warship appeared from nowhere and destroyed the fleet that came to celebrate humanity's death. Isolde stood very still. You did not end a war tonight, Captain Reyes, Vural Catherine said. You started one, and it is not humanity's war anymore because there is not enough of humanity left to fight it. It is everyone's war. You lit a fire in a galaxy full of dry wood, and you did it with the last human ship in existence, and now that ship, your spent, wounded, cornered ship, is the most important object in the galaxy. Every conquered species will want it as a banner. Every coalition loyalist will want it as a trophy. And the old voice paused. I am the commander of the fleet that is currently englobing you, and I have perhaps 20 minutes before my surviving captains who watched their comrades die tonight stop obeying my order to hold fire and decide to avenge them regardless of what I say. So I will ask you now, Captain, one commander to another, the only question that matters. When those 20 minutes are up, what do you want to be? A trophy or a banner? Because you will not get to be neither, and you will not get to be nothing, not after tonight. The channel hummed, open waiting. And Captain Isolde Reyes, 28 years old, last captain of the last ship of a dead species, stood on her command dais and understood that the battle she had thought was the end of everything had only been the beginning. Isolde muted the channel and turned to her crew. There were 9 of them left. 9, out of a complement that had once been 60. They were scattered across the command deck, Chen at navigation, Okonkwo at weapons, a burn-scarred systems officer named Tal at engineering, a comms tech named Vasquez who couldn't have been more than 20, and 4 others holding the stations that 4 years ago had held 4 times as many. 9 human beings, the whole species standing in one room looking at their captain. You all heard him, Isolde said. I'm not going to pretend you didn't. So I'm going to tell you what I think, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. And if any of you thinks I've got it wrong, you say so, because we're too few now for me to be wrong and nobody tell me. Nobody spoke. Tal at engineering wiped blood off his face with the back of a shaking hand and nodded. He's telling the truth, Isolde said. About all of it, the time, the 4 years that were the last. Her voice did not break, though she felt the place where it wanted to. I've suspected it since the graveyard vanished from the sensors. He just confirmed it. So let's not waste what little time we have wishing it weren't so. It is so. Everyone we knew is gone. Earth, she made herself say it. Earth is 4 years fallen, and there's no going back because the drive only folds forward. That's the ground we're standing on. Now here's what I think about it. She stepped down off the dais. It felt important, suddenly, not to be above them. He thinks he's told us the worst thing in the universe. He thinks he's broken us. That's why he opened the channel. He wants to talk to a broken thing, a thing that'll take a deal because it's got nothing left. And he's half right. We have got nothing left. But he doesn't understand what that means because his people have never once in 4,000 years had nothing left. They've always had the fleet, the covenant, the arithmetic. They've never stood in a room with 9 people and known that room was everything, so they don't know the thing we know. She looked around the deck from face to face. A creature with nothing left to lose isn't weaker. It's the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. He said that to me himself 4 years and a lifetime ago when he was still trying to kill us. He's afraid of us because we've got nothing to lose. He just told us we've got even less than he thought. He thinks that's a weapon he can use against us. Isolde smiled, and it was not a warm smile, and Chen, watching it, thought that it was the smile of the species itself, the thing the coalition had been trying and failing to kill for 11 years. It's not, she said. It's the opposite. He just handed us the deadliest thing we've ever held, and he doesn't even know he did it. Because now there is nothing we won't do. We are the last human beings alive. And the last human beings alive do not get to be a trophy, and we are not going to be a banner for somebody else's war either, some symbol other people wave while they do the dying. We're going to be the third thing, the thing he said we didn't get to be. She turned back toward the muted channel. We're going to be nothing. We're going to make ourselves into the one thing a galaxy full of people who want to use us can't have. And to do that, we're going to need him. So here's what we're going to do. She unmuted the channel. High Marshal, she said, you asked me what I want to be. Trophy or banner? I'm going to give you a third answer, and I think when you hear it, you're going to help me because I think you're as tired of your creed as I am of dying. You told me I lit a fire in a galaxy full of dry wood. You're right. And you and I both know that fire is going to burn whether my ship exists or not. The news is already out, you said so yourself. Ships are already fleeing to carry it. So the fire doesn't need us. It's got the story now. The story of the human ship that came back from the dead. That story is going to do what stories do, and neither of us can stop it. Which means my ship, the actual ship, the 9 actual people on it were free. For the first time in 11 years, humanity is not the thing everyone's fighting over, because the thing everyone's fighting over is a story now, and the story doesn't need us to keep being true. A silence on the channel, then slowly, "Go on, Captain." "Get us out," Isolde said. "You've got 20 minutes before your captain stop obeying you. I've got a fold drive that needs 11 hours to cycle. That math doesn't work unless you buy me the hours. Cover our withdrawal. Let the fleet think you're pursuing us, chasing the trophy, doing the doctrinally correct thing. And instead, escort us to the edge of your own sensor range and let us go dark. And then tell your coalition whatever you like. That you destroyed us, that we fled, that we folded away into nothing. Let the last human ship become a ghost. Let the story burn the galaxy down, and let the actual last 9 humans disappear into the dark where nobody can use us or kill us or make us into a banner. Give us that, High Marshal, and in exchange—" "In exchange," the old voice said, "Captain, you have nothing to offer me. You have said so yourself." "In exchange," Isolde said, "I don't fire the second shot." The silence that came back was different, sharper. "You have no second shot," Viral said carefully. "I watched your weapon spend itself. Your cavity is empty. My sensors confirm it." "Your sensors confirmed my ship was dead 8 days ago, too," Isolde said. "And then it appeared inside your circle. You want to bet the last 400 surviving ships of your fleet on your sensors, High Marshal. You want to explain to your captains why you're certain the ghost ship that came back from the dead carrying your own weapon turned inside out can't possibly have one more trick. Because here's the thing, you don't have to believe I have a second shot. You just have to not be certain I don't. And after tonight, High Marshal, after what you watch pass beneath your keel, can you honestly tell me you're certain?" Another silence. And then, very quietly, the old High Marshal did something that no one on the command deck of the perihelion Vow had ever heard a coalition officer do. He laughed. It was a strange, dry, rasping sound, filtered through 11 years of learning human speech, and it held no joy in it at all, only the terrible, bleak recognition of a creature who has met, at the very end of a long and murderous career, the one opponent worthy of it. "No, Captain," Viral Catherine said. "No, I cannot tell you I am certain. And that precisely that is the thing your species has done to mine that 4,000 years of the Covenant never prepared us for. You have made us unable to be certain of anything ever again. Very well. I will buy you your hours. I will cover your withdrawal, and I will lie to my fleet, and I will let the last human ship become a ghost. Not because you have threatened me. We both know the threat is empty or nearly empty, and that it does not matter whether it is empty because you are right. I cannot be certain. I will do it because—" He paused, and when he went on, the weariness in his voice had become something almost like grief. "Because I have spent my whole life serving a creed that told me the Covenant was the only kindness the dark allows. Accept your place and live. Refuse it and be sung to a spiral. And tonight I watched that creed fly its proudest formation and get 800 ships unmade in 9 seconds by the very species it declared could be safely sung over. My creed is a lie, Captain. It has always been a lie. There was never any safety in the Covenant. There was only a species that had not yet met the thing that would not accept it. And I would rather spend the last authority I have helping the last of that species disappear into the dark than give one more order in the name of a lie that has killed 411,000 of my own crew for nothing. So yes, I will get you out. Now stop talking and let me do it, before my 20 minutes become 10. The channel closed. And on the command deck of the perihelion Vow, Captain Isolde Reyes let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 4 years, and did not let herself believe, not yet, that it might work. It did not work. It almost worked. For 11 minutes it worked perfectly. The great enemy flagship broke from the gathered fleet and moved to englobe the Vow, calling the surviving ships into a pursuit formation, and Isolde brought the Vow around and lit her damaged engines and ran, slow and wounded, toward the edge of the system with the coalition fleet in ponderous pursuit behind her, and the High Marshal's voice came across the tight beam feeding her a course, a thread through the fleet's own sensor-blind spots, a path to the dark. 11 minutes. They were almost to the edge. Chen had the fold drive cycle counting down, 9 hours and 40 minutes to cold jump capability, and they only had to survive until they reached the sensor shadow and went dark, and then 11 hours of running silent, and then the fold, and then the dark, and then freedom. The third thing, nothing. And then a single coalition warship broke formation. It was not one of the great ships. It was a light cruiser, fast and lean, from the periphery of the shattered fleet, and it did not answer the High Marshal's order to hold formation, and it did not slow, and it drove straight for the perihelion Vow at a velocity no ship that intended to survive would use. High Marshal, Okonkwo said. She had the channel now. She was tracking the threat. One of yours has broken off. Light cruiser closing fast, not responding to your recall. What is it doing? The old voice came back tight. Its captain is Thren. Her clan nest was aboard the speaker's ship. Every one of her bloodkin died in your discharge, Captain. She is not pursuing you for a trophy. A pause. She is doing what your people taught mine to do. She has nothing left to lose, and she means to ram you. The words hung in the air of the command deck, and for one terrible instant nobody moved, because the irony of it was too complete to absorb. After everything, after the fold and the impossible weapon and the shattered fleet and the old High Marshal's bargain, the last human ship was going to be killed by a single grieving alien who had learned from watching humanity that a life spent to take an enemy was not a life wasted. Then the command deck moved. Range, Isolde snapped. 90 seconds to intercept and closing, Okonkwo said, hands flying. She's burning her engines past the red line, Captain. She doesn't care if she survives the acceleration. We can't outrun her. The Vow's too slow. We're too wounded. Point defense. Firing. Okonkwo was already firing. The Vow's remaining defensive batteries throwing everything they had at the incoming cruiser. And it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, because the cruiser was small and fast and hard to hit, and it did not care about survival. It only cared about arrival. Point defense rounds sparked off its hull and shields, and it kept coming, and the 90 seconds became 60, and the 60 became 40, and Isolde watched the death of the human species come screaming toward her across the dark and understood that all of it, the fold, the weapon, the bargain, the third thing, all of it was going to end here, 60,000 kilometers from freedom, at the hands of one alien who had learned humanity's lesson too well. Chen, her voice was very calm now. The cold, clear, bottomless place had opened all the way up one last time. The fold drive. You said 11 hours to cold jump. What happens if we don't wait? Chen turned from his board and stared at her. Captain, if we trigger the fold before the core cycles, it won't fold. There isn't enough charge to open a stable seam. It'll try and it'll fail, and the failure will. His face went pale as he understood what she was really asking. Captain, an uncontrolled fold at partial charge isn't a jump. It's a detonation. The seam opens and collapses in the same instant, and it releases everything the core has in a single point. It would take out the Vow and the cruiser and probably 1,000 kilometers of space around us. It's not an escape. It's a bomb. 40 seconds, Okonkwo said. It's a bomb, Isolde repeated. How big? Big enough, Chen whispered. Big enough to take her with us. But Captain, we don't survive it. There's no fold. There's no dark, no 11 hours, no third thing. There's just the end, right here. Us and her in the same fire. 30 seconds. Isolde looked around the command deck one last time. At Chen, who had folded them through 4 years and would have folded them through the rest of the dark if the drive had let him. At Okonkwo, who had lost her family twice and fired the point defense guns anyway, down to the last second. At Tal with the blood on his face, at young Vasquez at the comms, at the 4 others holding the stations of the dead. 9 human beings. The whole species in one room, and the room was everything. And she had told them she would not be wrong and have nobody tell her. "Say it," she said. "Any of you, if I've got this wrong. We trigger the fold, we die, and she dies with us and there's nothing after. Or we don't, and she rams us, and we die anyway, and she gets to be the one who ended humanity, and the story out there stops being the ship that came back from the dead and starts being the ship that got run down and killed 60,000 kilometers from freedom. Those are the 2 roads. Somebody tell me if there's a third." 20 seconds, Okonkwo said, and then quietly, "There isn't, Captain, I've been running it. There isn't a third road, not this time." "High Marshal," Isolde's hand was already moving toward the fold trigger. "Are you still there?" "I am here, Captain." The old voice was heavy with something that might have been grief and might have been awe. "I cannot stop her. I have given the order 3 times. She will not answer it. I am sorry. I bought you the hours and it was not enough. And I am sorry, Captain, more sorry than my creed has words for." "Don't be," Isolde said. "You kept your word. That's more than your creed ever managed. I'm going to do a thing now, High Marshal, and I want you to watch it, and I want you to remember it, and I want you to carry it to that galaxy full of dry wood, because you're the only one who's going to see it and live. Are you watching?" "I am watching." 10 seconds, Okonkwo said. "Then watch this," Isolde Reyes said, "and understand what we are and tell them. Tell all of them. You cannot kill a thing that will not be a trophy and will not be a banner and will choose the fire over both. You never could. That's the whole war, High Marshal, in one sentence, and it took you 11 years and 800 ships to learn it and you still don't believe it. So let me teach it to you one last time, so you'll believe it forever." Her hand closed on the fold trigger. "Chen," she said, "full charge, everything the Corps has, don't hold anything back." "Captain." "We never do," Isolde said. "That's the point, that's always been the point." "Fire it." 5 seconds, Okonkwo said, and her voice broke on it, and she reached across her board and found Chen's hand, and Chen found Vasquez's, and down the command deck of the last human ship, 9 human beings reached out in the last 5 seconds and held on to each other. And Isolde Reyes stood at the center of them with her hand on the trigger and her eyes on the alien death screaming toward them across the dark. And she was not afraid. She had used up all her fear 4 years ago. And there was only the work, and the work was almost done. "Fire it," she said. And Chen fired it. But the fold did not detonate. For one impossible instant, in the 60,000 kilometers between the perihelion vow and the ship that meant to kill it, the universe did the thing it had done once before, in a debris field 4 years and a lifetime ago. It folded. Not a jump, not a detonation. Something in between, something the drive had never done and would never do again. Something that only happened because the vow had folded once already and the Corps still remembered the shape of it, still carried the ghost of the last fold in its wounded heart. And when Chen poured everything into it at partial charge, the drive did not open a stable seam and it did not collapse into a bomb. It opened a wound in space, ragged and brief and wrong, exactly the color of a scream. And the perihelion vow fell into it. Not far. Not 4 years this time. The drive had nothing like the charge for that. It moved the vow perhaps 1,000 kilometers and perhaps 8 seconds, a stutter, a skip, a flinch in the fabric of the dark. But 1,000 kilometers and 8 seconds was everything, because when the ragged seam spat the vow back out into normal space, the ship was no longer where the Thren cruiser had aimed. The cruiser, burning past its red line, unable to stop, unable to turn, committed to a ram against a target that had ceased to be there, screamed through the empty volume of space where the perihelion vow had been an instant before, and found nothing to ram, and could not arrest its terrible velocity, and hurtled on into the dark, its grief unslaked. Its blow struck against the ghost of a ship that had flinched sideways out of time. On the command deck of the Vow, alarms shrieked. The core was gone, not depleted, gone, burned out utterly by a fold it was never built to survive, a blackened dead mass where the ship's heart had been. The lights failed. Half the deck went dark. Chen was slumped over his board, unconscious or worse, and Tal was screaming something about the reactor from engineering, and the ship was tumbling, powerless, venting atmosphere from a dozen new wounds. But it was intact. It was there. 9 human beings, battered and bleeding in the dark, were still breathing, because the last fold their dead ship would ever make had thrown them 8 seconds and 1,000 kilometers to the side, out of the path of the death that had come for them. Isolde Reyes pulled herself up off the deck. Blood ran into her eye from a cut on her forehead. The command deck was a ruin, lit red by the emergency panels, and her crew was strewn across it, groaning, alive. "Report," she rasped. Tal's voice came back over the failing intercom, disbelieving. "Captain, we're alive. The core's dead, completely dead. We'll never fold again, we'll barely have power to keep the lights on, we're adrift, but we're alive." She missed. Captain, she missed. And across the dark, on the command deck of the undimmed Concordance, High Marshal Vural Catherine stood before a display that showed the impossible. The human ship, spat back out of a fold it should never have survived, tumbling and dark and alive, and the grieving Thren cruiser hurtling away past it into the empty dark. Its ram struck against nothing, and the old High Marshal understood that he had just watched the last human ship do the thing its species had spent 11 years teaching him to fear. It had chosen the fire, and the fire had refused to take it. The perihelion Vow drifted. For the better part of an hour it drifted, powerless and tumbling, while its 9 survivors worked in the red emergency light to keep themselves and their ship alive. Tal got the reactor stabilized, not restarted. The fold-burned core would never restart, but stabilized enough to feed the barest trickle of power to life support and the emergency panels. Okonkwo dragged Chen off his board and found him breathing, concussed but alive, and strapped him into a crash couch. Vasquez, 20 years old and steadier than any of them had a right to expect, kept the comms alive with a hand-cranked backup and watched the tactical plot with hollow eyes, waiting for the surviving coalition fleet to close in and finish what 4,000 years of doctrine demanded. The fleet did not close in. Isolde understood why before Vasquez said it. She stood at the dead center of her ruined command deck, one hand pressed to the cut on her forehead, and watched the surviving coalition ships on the failing tactical plot, and she watched them not close, and she understood that the old High Marshal had made his choice. "Captain," Vasquez said quietly, "the enemy flagship is signaling. Tight beam, it's the High Marshal." "Put him on, audio only. We don't have power for anything else." The old voice came through the failing speaker, thin with distance and static, but unmistakable. "Captain Reyes, you are alive." "For now," Isolde said. "Our core's dead. We can't fold, we can't run, we can barely keep the lights on. You've got 400 warships and a drifting ghost, High Marshal. You could finish us with a single lance. Why haven't you?" The pause on the channel was long, and full of the sound of an old creature deciding what he had become. "Because I have flown the extinction spiral 3 times in my life," Vural said, "and I have finally understood at the very end what the formation is truly for. My people told ourselves it was a formation of mourning, a dignity we extended to the species we erased. That is a lie, Captain. It is a lie we told ourselves for 4,000 years to make the killing bearable. The spiral is not a formation of mourning. It is a formation of certainty. We fly it to tell ourselves that the thing is finished, that we are safe, that we may sleep. It is a lullaby we sing to our own fear. And tonight I watched that lullaby get 800 ships unmade because the certainty was false, because it was always false, because there was never any safety in it at all. A breath, ragged with age and grief. I will not fly it again. Not over you, not over anyone. I am done being certain, Captain. and a High Marshal who is done being certain is no longer a High Marshal. He is only a very old creature with 400 ships and one last decision to make. And what's the decision? Isolde said. I told you I would buy you your hours, Viral said, and the Thren cruiser took them from us both, so I will buy you something else instead. I will buy you a death, a convincing one. Do you understand me, Captain? Your ship cannot fold and cannot run, and if it is known to exist, it will be hunted to the last day of the last of you, as a trophy by my people, as a banner by yours, by everyone forever. There is no third road for a ship that is known to exist, but there is a road for a ship that is known to have died, and I am the commander of the fleet that watched you die. I am the only witness whose word the entire coalition will believe. So here is my decision, Captain Reyes. I am going to report that the last human warship, cornered and spent, chose the fire over surrender and detonated its own drive and destroyed itself and the pursuing cruiser in a single blast, rather than be taken. A pause. It is not even a lie. It is very nearly exactly what happened. The only detail I will omit is that the fire refused to take you. Isolde was silent for a moment. On the ruined command deck, her crew had gone still, listening. You do that, she said. You tell your own people the ghost is dead. You'd close the book on humanity yourself and let us disappear into the dark and carry that lie to your grave. Why? What do you get out of it, High Marshal? You're the one who told me I lit a fire in a galaxy of dry wood. If humanity's dead, really dead, then your fire goes out. The conquered species stay conquered. The coalition rebuilds. You'd be saving the very thing you just told me was a lie. The old voice, when it came back, held something Isolde had not heard from any coalition creature in 11 years. It held hope. You misunderstand me, Captain, and it is the most important thing I will ever say to you, so hear it clearly. A breath. The fire does not need your ship. It never did. You said this to me yourself, and you were right, and it took me until this hour to understand how right you were. The story is already out. Ships fled this system carrying the news before your weapon had finished burning. The news that a human warship appeared from nowhere and destroyed the fleet that came to sing over humanity's grave. That story is loose in the galaxy now, and it cannot be recalled, and it does not matter at all whether your ship lives or dies, because the story has already stopped being about a ship. It is about an idea. It is about the discovery that the Covenant is a lie, that certainty is a lullaby, that a species with nothing left to lose cannot be safely erased. Every conquered people in the galaxy is going to hear that story, and it is going to change everything, and it would change everything just the same if your ship had died 1,000 times over. The old High Marshal's voice dropped, low and urgent, the voice of a creature handing over the last truth he had. So here is what I get, Captain. If your ship is known to have died, the story becomes a legend, a beautiful, finished, unkillable legend, the human ship that came back from the dead and chose the fire and took its killer with it. And a legend cannot be captured. A legend cannot be made into a trophy or a banner. A legend cannot be interrogated or displayed or spent in someone else's war. A dead ship story belongs to everyone and to no one, and it will burn down the Covenant more surely than any living ship ever could, because it can never be answered. But if your ship is known to live, then you are not a legend, Captain. You are a target. You are a hostage the whole galaxy fights over. You are a thing that can be captured and used, and the moment you are captured and used, the story stops being about an unkillable idea and starts being about 9 tired human beings in a captured ship. And the Covenant survives, because a hostage can always, eventually, be broken. Do you see? The only way to save the fire is to let the ship die. The only way to keep humanity dangerous forever is to let humanity, the actual humanity, the 9 of you, disappear into the dark and never be seen again. I am not saving the coalition, Captain Reyes. I am ending it. I am simply doing it with a lie instead of a lance, because after 411,000 deaths, I find I have no more taste for lances. Isolde Reyes stood in the red light of her dying ship, and she understood that the old creature on the other end of the channel had, in the space of a single conversation, become the most important ally the human species would ever have, and that no human being would ever know it, because the price of the alliance was that no human being could ever be seen again. "You're asking us to vanish," she said, "for good. No going home. There's no home to go to. No allies, no banner, no name. You're asking the last 9 humans in the galaxy to spend the rest of their lives as a ghost story, to be dead so that the idea of us stays dangerous." "Yes," Viral said. "That is precisely what I am asking. And I know what I am asking, Captain, because I am asking you to do the one thing your species has proven across 11 years. It is better at than any species I have ever encountered. I am asking you to give up everything, every comfort, every recognition, every hope of return, and hold nothing back, and pour it all into a single purpose larger than yourselves, and expect no reward and receive none. I am asking you to be human. One last time, forever." The channel hummed, and Captain Isolde Reyes looked at her crew, at Chen strapped unconscious into his couch, at Okonkwo, who had lost her family twice, at Tal and Vasquez and the 4 others, at the whole of the human species standing in one ruined room in the red emergency light. And she asked them, because she had promised she would not be wrong and have nobody tell her. She asked them, and one by one they answered. They said yes. Not all at once, and not without cost. Vasquez wept when she said it because she was 20 years old and had thought, in the desperate arithmetic of the debris field, that surviving meant someday going home, and now there would never be a home and never be a someday, only the dark and the ghost and the long silence. Okonkwo said it flat and hard, the way she said everything, but Isolde saw what it cost her, to accept that her sister Adiz, who had died designing the weapon that shattered the fleet, would never be named, never be honored, never be anything but an unmarked death in a story that officially never happened. Tal said it last, wiping the blood from his face, and what he said was, "My whole life, Captain, they told us we were fighting to be remembered, to not be erased. And now you're telling me the only way to win is to erase ourselves on purpose." He was quiet a moment. "Yeah, all right, if that's what it takes to make sure they never sleep easy again. Yeah." Chen never got to vote. He was still unconscious when the choice was made, strapped into his couch, and when he woke 6 hours later and Isolde told him what they had decided, he was quiet for a long time, and then he laughed weakly, the way a man laughs at a joke too large to hold. "We folded through 4 years to become a ghost story," he said, "and we're going to spend the rest of our lives making sure it stays a good one. God, that's the most human thing I've ever heard." And then he wept too, a little, and then he asked what the plan was, because there was work to do, and there is always work to do, and the work is the thing that carries you when nothing else will. So they did it. High Marshal Vural Catherine was as good as his word, which was the only thing he had left to be. He brought the undimmed concordance in close to the drifting vow, close enough that the flagship's shadow fell across the little wounded human ship, and under cover of that shadow, hidden from the sensors of the surviving fleet, he did the last great work of his career. He offloaded from his own vessel everything the vow would need to survive in the dark. A replacement core, salvaged and stripped of its coalition markings, fuel and food, and the raw materials of 1,000 repairs. Charts of the deep, empty places between the arms of the galaxy, the void zones no species claimed, where a ghost might drift for a lifetime and never be found. He gave them a ship's worth of second chances, and he asked for nothing in return. And when Isolde tried to thank him, over the tight beam, in the last hour before the end, the old creature stopped her. "Do not thank me, Captain," he said. "I am not doing you a kindness. I am doing my species a violence it has earned 4,000 years over, and I am using you to do it, and if there were any justice I would go to my grave hated by both our peoples, by mine for the lie, by yours for the exile. But there is no justice, Captain. There is only the dark, and the covenant we told ourselves would keep us safe in it, and the species that proved the covenant a lie. so I will not be thanked. I will only ask one thing of you, and then I will let you go." "Ask it," Isolde said. "Survive," the High Marshal said. "That is all. Survive out there in the dark for as long as your 9 lives and whatever lives come after them can be made to last. Not for me. Not for revenge. You have had your revenge, and it was terrible, and it was enough. Survive because the legend needs a truth underneath it, even a truth no one will ever see. Because somewhere out there in the deep void, there must actually be 9 human beings keeping the species alive in secret, or the story is only a story and stories die. Be the truth under the legend, Captain. Be the ember under the ash. And someday, not in my lifetime, not in yours, but someday, when the Covenant has finally burned down and the galaxy has learned to live without its lullaby, come out of the dark. Let humanity be seen again when it is safe to be seen, when there is no longer anyone left who would make you a trophy or a banner. That is my ask. Survive and someday return. Can you promise me that?" Isolde Reyes looked around her ruined command deck. At the new corps Tal and Okonkwo were already coaxing to life. At Chen bent over his charts of the deep void. At Vasquez wiping her eyes and manning her comms. At the whole of the human species bending itself, once again, to the work of the impossible. "We're not good at promises, High Marshal," she said. "We break the ones that ask us to lie down and die. But that one," she almost smiled, "that one asks us to survive and to not be seen and to come back when it counts. That's not a promise, that's just who we are. So yes, I promise. We'll be the ember, and someday when it's time we'll come back, and the galaxy will find out that the ghost was real all along." She paused. "Thank you anyway, High Marshal. I know you said not to, but there's nobody else who will ever get to say it, so somebody has to, and it's going to be me." There was a long silence on the channel. "Go, Captain," Viral Catherine said at last, and his old voice was thick with something no translation matrix could name. "Go into the dark, and be the thing my creed said could not exist. Go and survive and someday return. And Captain, when you tell your children the story and their children after them, and it becomes the tale of how the last human ship vanished into the void and left a legend burning behind it, do not leave out the old alien who helped you go. Not for my glory. I want no glory. Only so that somewhere in some corner of the human memory, it is written down that at the very end one of us learned that the Covenant did not have to be, that an enemy could become something else. I would like to be remembered as the thing that learned. It is all I have left to want." "You will be," Isolde said. "I promise you that too." And then the tight beam closed for the last time, and the shadow of the great flagship drew back, and the perihelion vow lit its new core and turned its wounded nose toward the deep empty dark between the arms of the galaxy, and it went. The coalition record of the Battle of the Yellow Star, for so it came to be called, after the small ordinary sun around which the extinction spiral had been flown, is brief and official and false. It records that the last human warship, having somehow evaded destruction at the Meridian Reach and lain hidden for years, emerged at the confirmation of the human extinction and destroyed 800 coalition vessels in a single catastrophic discharge before being pursued, cornered, and destroyed with all hands when it detonated its own drive rather than surrender. It records the death of the Speaker of the Conquered and the founding delegates of 9 species. It records the losses, 841 warships and the crew of each, and it records the name of the High Marshal who reported it, Viral Catherine, who retired from the fleet within the standard year, and lived out the rest of his long life in silence on a gray moon at the edge of Cathari space, and who never once, in all the years remaining to him, flew the extinction spiral again, and who forbade, by the last authority of his rank, its ever being flown by the ships under his old command. That is the official record. But the official record is not the story the galaxy tells. The story the galaxy tells is different, and it does not live in any archive, and it cannot be recalled or corrected or erased, because it lives in the place the coalition could never reach. in the hushed voices of the conquered, in the songs the Covenant tried to forbid, in the dark between the words of every species that ever knelt because the alternative was to be sung to a spiral. It is the story of the ship that came back from the dead. It is the story of the fleet that celebrated too soon, that flew its proudest formation of certainty over a grave that was not a grave, and that watched a single human warship appear from nowhere, from no direction, from no distance, from a place the sensors could not read, and a time no one expected, and turn the formation of certainty into a formation of ash. And in that story, humanity did not die at the yellow star. That is the part the coalition could never stamp out, no matter how official its record. Because the conquered species did the arithmetic themselves, the way the captured always do, in secret, in the dark, and they understood the thing the High Marshal had understood in the instant the weapon passed beneath his keel, that a species which could do this once could do it again. That certainty was a lullaby, and the lullaby was over. That somewhere out in the deep void, beyond the edge of every chart, the last of the humans might still be drifting, an ember under the ash, a truth beneath the legend, waiting. They did not sleep easy after the yellow star. None of them, not the loyal and not the conquered, not the High Marshals who came after, nor the speakers who tried to rebuild the conquered. How could they? The Covenant had promised them that a species, once erased, stayed erased, that the dark could be made safe, that the arithmetic could be resolved to zero, that they could sing the closing hymn and sleep. And the humans had proven the promise a lie with a single ship from a place beyond the reach of certainty. There was no formation you could fly, no count you could complete, no grave you could stand upon and be sure. The ghost might be real. The ember might still be burning. Somewhere out in the dark, 9 human beings and whatever came after them might be surviving, in secret, patient, unhurried, holding nothing back, waiting for the day the old alien had asked them to wait for, the day it was safe to be seen again, the day they would come out of the void and the galaxy would learn that the legend had been true all along. That was the fire Isolde Reyes lit, not a weapon, not a fleet, a doubt. A single unkillable doubt, seeded into a galaxy that had spent 4,000 years telling itself it was safe. And it burned down the Covenant not in a year or a century, but slowly, surely, the way a species that will not lie down and die burns down everything that tells it that it must. The coalition celebrated too soon. It flew the spiral over a corpse, and the corpse woke up inside the circle, and nothing was ever certain again. And far out in the deep empty dark, beyond the last chart and the last sensor and the last grave the coalition would ever dare call complete, a small wounded warship drifted on toward the void it had chosen, its 9 survivors bent to the endless work of staying alive, its new core beating steady, its captain standing at the rail of her command dais with her eyes on the dark ahead, young still and tired beyond her years and utterly unafraid, carrying the whole of a species and a promise made to an old enemy who had learned, at the very end, the one thing his creed could never teach him, that you cannot celebrate the death of a thing that has decided, with everything it has and everything it is, simply and forever to survive. The perihelion vow sailed on into the dark, and the legend burned behind it, and somewhere ahead, past the end of every certainty, the day was waiting when the ghost would choose to be seen again. They were in no hurry. They had all the time in the galaxy. And they had learned, better than any species that ever lived, how to wait in the dark for the moment to come back.